Machines hummed a steady death march inside Trauma Bay 4. A decorated Navy SEAL lay paralyzed, abandoned by top civilian doctors who called his case hopeless. But they didn't know the quiet night nurse adjusting his the fourth had a classified past, and she was about to trigger a shadow protocol. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a sickening sterile hum above the intensive care unit at Seattle Presbyterian Hospital. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a brutal Tuesday, the kind of dead hour where the emergency room usually suffocated in its own quiet misery. Cayden James stood out of the way, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her faded navy blue scrubs. She was a woman who had mastered the ultimate art of invisibility. At 34, her demeanor was so exceptionally plain, so entirely devoid of ego or demand, that most of the attending physicians barely remembered her name. To the hospital administration, Cayden was just a dependable graveyard shift nurse who never complained about overtime, never gossiped in the break room, and never questioned the orders handed down by her superiors. Nobody in the civilian world knew that 5 years ago, Cayden had worn a very different uniform, operating under a heavily redacted title in the dust-choked medical tents of Bagram and undisclosed black sites across the Horn of Africa. The double doors of Trauma Bay crashed open, shattering the quiet. Paramedics rushed in, their voices overlapping in a frantic, disjointed chorus. On the gurney between them lay a man who looked less like a living human and more like a casualty of a forgotten war. He had been dropped off at the emergency bay by an unmarked black SUV that had peeled away before security could even log its license plate. "John Doe, mid-30s, the lead paramedic shouted, transferring the heavy patient onto the hospital bed with a synchronized heave. Unresponsive. No identification, no wallet, no phone. Found outside the ambulance bay. Pulse is thready, barely palpable. Blood pressure tanking, 60/40. We pushed 2 rounds of epinephrine, but his pressure keeps dropping. He's burning up. Temp is 104, but his skin is ice cold." Dr. Royce Belmont, the hospital's chief of trauma, strode into the room, snapping latex gloves over his wrists. Belmont was a man whose reputation for brilliance was only eclipsed by his staggering arrogance. He liked clean textbook cases he could solve with a scalpel and a decisive command. He did not like John Does, who arrived in the middle of the night smelling of ozone, necrotic tissue, and secrets. "Get him on a monitor." "Push a liter of saline and draw a full panel," Belmont ordered, his voice clipped and irritated. "Get me a tox screen. It's probably just another overdose." Cayden moved in silence, her hands a blur of practiced efficiency as she attached the ECG leads to the man's chest. As she unbuttoned his soaked, ruined tactical shirt, she noticed the physical map of the man's life. His torso was a canvas of violence, unmistakable silver shrapnel scars, a puckered bullet wound near his left clavicle, and the distinct, rigid musculature of a man who had spent his life operating at the extreme edge of human endurance. But it was the terrifying spread of darkness beneath his skin that caught her immediate attention. A localized network of deep purple and black veins radiated outward from a small, almost invisible puncture wound on his right shoulder. The necrosis was spreading at an unnatural, predatory rate. Belmont stared at the monitors, his brow furrowing as the alarms began to shriek. The patient's heart rate was plummeting, and his organs were entering rapid cascading failure. The monitor displayed a terrifying reality. His liver and kidneys were shutting down simultaneously, overwhelmed by a pathogen or toxin that defied standard civilian medical logic. "Acidosis is off the charts." Another nurse, Jessica, called out, her voice trembling. "His lungs are filling with fluid. He's drowning from the inside out." Belmont sighed, a sound of heavy clinical resignation. He stepped back from the bed, stripping off his gloves. "Stop pushing the epi. It's a waste of resources." Cayden froze, her fingers hovering over a fresh syringe of norepinephrine. "Dr. Yo—" "Look at him, Nurse James," Belmont said condescendingly, gesturing to the dying man. "Massive multi-organ failure, deep tissue necrosis. He's septic, and his central nervous system is collapsing. Whatever he was exposed to is entirely systemic. Brain activity is barely registering. There is no viable path to recovery. Keep him comfortable, morphine drip, DNR status. We are not wasting a ventilator on a John Doe who is already a ghost." "He's not an overdose," Cayden said, her tone unnervingly flat. "Look at the localized vascular damage around the puncture site. Look at the rigidity in his jaw." This is a neurotoxic reaction, not a narcotic one. Belmont turned to her, eyes narrowing. Are you a doctor now, James? Because last time I checked, I was the chief of trauma, and you changed bedpans? He is palliative. Give him the morphine, note the DNR in his chart. That is an order. Belmont turned on his heel and walked out, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in his wake. The other nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances before slowly backing away. Cayden remained beside the bed. She picked up a warm washcloth and began to gently clean the grime and sweat from his face. As she tilted his head, her fingers brushed against a small raised ridge of skin behind his right ear. She paused. It wasn't a natural scar. She pressed her thumb against it, feeling the distinct geometric shape embedded beneath the dermal layer, subdermal RFID marker. Civilian hospitals wouldn't know what to look for, but Cayden did. Carefully shielding her movements from the security camera in the corner, she lifted the man's right arm. On the inner bicep, hidden beneath smeared mud and dried blood, she found what she was looking for, a faded, deeply etched tattoo. A trident flanked by a specific sequence of Roman numerals. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A Tier 1 operator. SEAL. Cayden leaned closer. Faint metallic odor clinging to his skin wasn't ozone. It was the distinct chemical byproduct of Somenv, a highly classified, synthesized, weaponized neurotoxin. She had only encountered it once before, during a covert extraction in Damascus. It was designed to mimic massive septic shock and organ failure, ensuring the target died in a civilian hospital without raising any alarms about chemical warfare. Standard civilian tox screens would never catch it. The hospital's broad-spectrum antibiotics and saline drips were completely useless. Without the exact classified counteragent, this SEAL would be dead in less than 2 hours. The clock on the wall read 2:45 a.m. Cayden's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of total composure. She had 90 minutes before the toxin paralyzed his diaphragm completely. Belmont had strictly ordered palliative care. Any deviation, especially administering unsanctioned treatment, would strip Cayden of her nursing license, land her in federal prison, and draw exactly the kind of attention she had spent 5 years trying to escape. But looking at the fading pulse of the man on the bed, she knew her quiet life was over. You don't leave a man behind. It was a creed carved into her bones deeper than any hospital protocol. Cayden walked out of Trauma Bay 4, locking the heavy glass door behind her and pulling the privacy blinds shut. She called Jessica at the nurse's station. Jess, I need a massive favor. Do not let anyone, not even Belmont, into Bay for the next 20 minutes. Tell them I'm prepping the body and the patient is highly contagious. Suspected virulent staph strain, keep them away. Jessica looked terrified but nodded. Cayden's absolute authority in that moment was impossible to deny. Cayden hurried down the corridor toward the staff locker room, her mind racing through classified operational protocols she hadn't touched since she walked away from JSOC. She reached her locker, spun the combination, and pulled out a plain black duffel bag. From a hidden seam in the lining, she extracted a heavy encrypted satellite phone, hardware strictly forbidden on hospital grounds, shielded to bypass local cell towers. She powered it on. The screen glowed a harsh tactical green. She punched in a 13-digit alphanumeric sequence, a ghost number. A direct line to the Defense Health Agency's classified Special Operations Triage Desk at Fort Liberty. The line clicked, no ringing. Just the hollow static hiss of a secure connection. Identify. This is Nightingale Actual, Cayden said, her voice dropping into a sharp, commanding cadence she hadn't used in years. Authentication code, CRA Tango Naner 7 Omega. I am initiating protocol Cerberus. A heavy silence. Rapid key clicks on the other end. Nightingale Actual, your clearance was archived. You were off the board. I am standing in Seattle Presbyterian Hospital, Cayden snapped. I have a Tier 1 operator dying in Trauma Bay 4. Systemic collapse, rapid dermal necrosis. It's undetectable on civilian tox screens, all hallmarks of Somenv synthetic neurotoxin exposure. I need a medical extraction team and the Cerberus counteragent in my hands an hour ago. Stand by. Cayden paced the small locker room, her eyes darting to the door. Every second was a drop of life draining from the CL's veins. Finally, the operator returned, voice entirely stripped of its robotic detachment. Nightingale, we have a massive problem. No active operations in the Pacific Northwest. The DevGroup personnel roster shows no missing assets. Every operator is accounted for. Whoever you have in that bed officially, he does not exist. A pause. And if he was hit with Somenv, that's a proprietary domestic compound. He wasn't hit by a foreign target. He was hit by one of our own. The words landed like a physical blow. An inside job. The SEAL hadn't been injured in the line of duty. He had been silenced. Someone within the intelligence apparatus wanted him dead, dumped at a civilian hospital to look like an unexplainable tragedy. I don't care about the politics, Cayden growled, her grip on the phone tightening. I have a dying man who took an oath. Are you sending the counteragent, or am I watching him die? Protocol Cerberus requires flag officer authorization for domestic deployment. I can't scramble a Black Hawk with classified military antidotes to a public civilian hospital. Then you have exactly 30 minutes to figure it out. Because I am not letting him die. She ended the call and sprinted back to the ICU. As she rounded the corner, her blood ran cold. Dr. Belmont was standing outside Trauma Bay 4, face purple with rage, aggressively gesturing at a trembling Jessica. 2 large hospital security guards flanked him. I don't care about a suspected infection, Belmont was shouting. I am the chief of surgery. Unlock this door now, or I will have you both escorted off the premises. Cayden slowed her pace, forcing her breathing steady. Is there a problem, Dr. Belmont? Belmont spun toward her. I ordered palliative care. Morphine hasn't been logged. Why is this door locked? The patient is experiencing violent post-mortem spasms, Cayden said smoothly, meeting Belmont's eyes without flinching. I locked the door to prevent panic among the other patients. I was just heading to pharmacy to pull the morphine. Belmont sneered. Open the door. I want to verify his status myself, sir. Without proper hazmat protocol. Open the damn door, James. Cayden's mind raced. If Belmont went in there, he would see the SEAL was still fighting. He would pull the plug himself, or worse, mishandle the necrotic tissue and trigger the neurotoxin's secondary airborne phase. She had to buy time. Okay, she said softly. She reached for her keycard, bringing it slowly toward the scanner. Then the overhead lights flickered violently. Sharp mechanical whine echoed through the corridors, followed by a series of heavy percussive thuds from the roof. The lights died completely, plunging the entire floor into pitch darkness. A split second later, the dull red glow of emergency backup generators hummed to life, casting eerie blood-colored shadows across the hallway. Before Belmont could utter a word, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. Out stepped 4 men in unbranded black tactical gear, suppressed rifles strapped to their chests. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, completely ignoring the screaming nurses and stunned security guards. The leader locked eyes with Cayden. In his left hand, a stainless steel thermal lockbox. Cayden turned to a paralyzed Dr. Belmont. I think my transfer team is here, Doctor. Within 3 seconds, the 2 security guards were disarmed, swept off their feet, and zip-tied to the floor. Federal agents, what is the meaning of Belmont sputtered? The team leader stepped over the incapacitated guards and faced Cayden. Nightingale, he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. Commander Griffin, JSOC Special Activities Division. We intercepted your distress signal from Fort Liberty. You have less than 12 minutes before the systemic shock becomes irreversible. Griffin placed the thermal lockbox on the nearest crash cart and keyed in a biometric sequence. The box hissed, releasing a cloud of freezing nitrogen vapor. Inside rested 3 heavy glass vials containing a luminous amber serum. Belmont stared at Cayden, the quiet, unassuming night nurse he had belittled for years, now exchanging tactical shorthand with elite military operatives. James, I forbid you from administering an unapproved substance. Griffin raised his left hand. An operative stepped forward, pressing a heavy gloved palm firmly against the surgeon's chest, pinning him against the wall. Doctor, the operative said quietly, if you speak again, I will wire your jaw shut. Nod if you understand. Belmont, trembling, nodded. Cayden snatched the first vial, loaded it into a heavy-gauge syringe, and pushed through the doors of Trauma Bay 4. The SEAL was slipping away. The monitors flashed a catastrophic array of red warnings. Heart rate a critical 20 beats per minute. Pushing Cerberus Alpha, Cayden announced, injecting the amber liquid directly into his central line. For agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the SEAL's body arched violently off the mattress. A sickening crack echoed through the room as his muscles contracted with enough force to threaten his own skeletal structure. The heart monitor let out a continuous flatline shriek. "He's coding." Jessica screamed from the corner. "Stand down," Cayden ordered, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. It's the counteragent binding to the neurotoxin. Forcing a metabolic reboot, she charged the paddles. Clear. The shock jolted the SEAL's chest. The flatline persisted. Griffin stepped into the room, eyes scanning the shadows. "Nightingale, if we lose him, we lose the only leverage we have against the domestic cell that ordered this." Push the second vial. Cayden loaded the second syringe, hands perfectly steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She injected the second dose. "Come on, sailor," she whispered fiercely. "You didn't survive Ramadi to die in a civilian bed in Seattle." The monitor spiked. A harsh, jagged peak, then another. The SEAL gasped, eyes snapping open, dilated, wild, unseeing but breathing. The spreading necrosis on his shoulder began to stall. The deep purple veins slowly receded as the military-grade counteragent neutralized the chemical weapon in his blood. Cayden let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Vitals are stabilizing. Pressure is rising. He's back in the room. Then the heavy glass doors of the trauma bay shattered inward. A man in a standard Seattle EMT uniform stepped through the broken glass. But his posture was entirely wrong for a paramedic. And the weapon in his hand, a customized suppressed Heckler & Koch USP, was definitely not standard hospital issue. "Target acquired," the fake EMT muttered into a covert lapel mic, raising the weapon toward the bedridden SEAL. The assassin, the rogue operative, who had deployed the Soman V, had stayed behind to finish the job, slipping into the hospital during the blackout chaos. Griffin raised his rifle, but the assassin had a hostage. Jessica, suppressor pressed against her temple. "Drop the rifles or the civilian loses her head," the assassin ordered. Eyes darting frantically between Griffin and the SEAL. "This asset is compromised. He does not leave this hospital alive. Orders from the top." "Whoever you're working for, son," Griffin said, keeping his weapon trained. "They just signed your death warrant." The assassin sneered. He tightened his finger on the trigger. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had focused entirely on the strike team and the man in the bed. He had completely ignored the quiet, unassuming nurse standing beside the crash cart. Cayden didn't hesitate, tapping into muscle memory forged in the deadliest training camps on Earth. She grabbed a heavy stainless steel oxygen canister from the cart. With a ferocious pivot, she hurled it directly at the assassin's head. The canister struck him squarely in the jaw with a sickening crunch. He staggered, his grip on Jessica faltering. Cayden closed the distance instantly. She tackled him to the ground, her knee driving ruthlessly into his solar plexus. Before he could recover, she grabbed his wrist and applied a savage joint lock that snapped his radius bone. The suppressed pistol clattered across the blood-slicked floor. Griffin's men moved in, dragging the screaming assassin upright and neutralizing him with a heavy blow to the back of the head. Jessica collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Cayden knelt beside her, her voice returning to the soft, gentle tone she used with her patients. "It's over, Jess. You did great. You're safe." "Time is up, Nightingale," Griffin barked, checking his tactical watch. "Local police have surrounded the building. We need to dust off." Griffin's men unrolled a specialized reinforced medical extraction pod. Working together, Cayden and the operatives transferred the stabilized SEAL inside, securing his 4 lines and oxygen feed. Cayden stood up and looked around the devastated trauma bay, the shattered glass, the blood, the incapacitated assassin, terrified staff. Her civilian cover was blown entirely. The quiet life she had built in Seattle, the anonymity she had cherished, was gone forever. "They know you're alive now, Cayden," Griffin said softly, dropping the tactical moniker for a brief moment. "The people who ordered this hit have eyes everywhere. If you stay here, they will find you. And this time, they won't use Soman V." Cayden looked at Dr. Belmont, still pinned against the wall, staring at her with a mixture of absolute terror and bewildered. She walked over to him, pulled her hospital ID badge from her scrubs, dropped it at his feet. "I quit." She held his gaze. "Log this entire incident as a catastrophic failure of the backup generator system. If you mention the military, the gunfire, or the man in Bay 4 to the police. The men who just tried to kill us will come for you next. Stick to the medical charts. Belmont swallowed hard and nodded. Let's move, Cayden said to Griffin. They reached the roof just as a massive unmarked stealth Black Hawk descended from the heavy cloud cover, its rotors slicing through the freezing Seattle night. The operatives loaded the extraction pod into the belly of the aircraft. The unconscious rogue assassin followed a highly valuable prisoner for the interrogations ahead. Cayden stood on the edge of the helipad, brutal wind whipping her hair across her face. She looked down at the hospital one last time. She had saved lives here, found a fragile peace. But peace, she now understood, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Griffin extended a hand from the side door. Cayden took it, pulling herself into the darkened cabin. As the Black Hawk banked sharply and disappeared into the radar-jammed corridors of the Pacific Northwest sky, Cayden looked down at the monitor attached to the extraction pod. The SEAL's heart was beating strong. The mission was a success. The Shadow War had found her again, but this time she was ready. The quiet nurse was gone. The nightingale had returned. By sunrise, the official story in Seattle was that a massive power surge had caused an electrical explosion in the intensive care unit. The hospital administration, heavily pressured by anonymous federal agents who arrived at dawn, sealed all records of the night's events. The terrified staff were given non-disclosure agreements and unexplained bonuses. The rogue assassin was quietly scrubbed from every database on Earth. And in a classified underground medical facility in Virginia, a decorated Navy SEAL finally opened his eyes, unaware that he owed his life to a ghost who had refused to let him die. Subscribe my channel